for me, the figures are pretty damning. You can go through the list of them there, and it says, 98% of my members reported the cost of living has increased in the last month. 83% of the members say they're dissatisfied or very dissatisfied with basically their pay and allowances. These are high figures. You look at morale, 95% how the police are treated by the government has had a negative impact on how they feel about policing. We've never had those figures before. It's getting a lot worse. Something needs to be done to address that situation drastically.
And just tell us a little bit about the history then. So what do you think has led up to these pretty high figures in this survey? Is this a trend that you've been noticing in the past few years?
It has. And what I've noticed is looking at other areas who are striking at the moment, and I make the point that police cannot strike, we're prevented from doing so by law, is that they've been citing they've had pay cuts for the past 2 to 3 years. My members, police officers who are out there every single day protecting the public, have had pay cuts since 2010. In real terms, we are 25 to 30% behind where we should be had we had cost of living and inflation related pay rises. That's unacceptable. To have police officers who are out there working every day to deal with the strikes because of the pay situation, which isn't our fault at all, and for the restrictions placed in their private lives. We don't have the right to seek industrial action. We can't strike. We have a pay situation what the remit authority, which is sent from the Home Secretary's office to the pay and remuneration body, they're effectively capped in what they're allowed to recommend. That's not fair. If you look at the government's own pay situation, they've got an independent pay body which decides on what pay they can have, and they accept it, no problem. With pay, it's unique. Every other industry or organisation in the public sector has a negotiating situation. Police officers don't. Our pay is imposed upon us. We have no right to negotiate. And that's not fair. So effectively, our pay campaign, based on the pay morale survey, is about fair pay for police officers, because it needs to be recognised that we're not just there because we want to be. We're there to earn a wage, to look after our families, to enjoy our lives, but also to recognise the restrictions that we have on our private lives, which, we've already talked about, that right to not take industrial action. It's huge. It's massively impactful. And you know that when you join the police, but when that's not reflected by the government to give you a good pay award, to protect your pension and the other allowances, you can't help but feel that's what's led to the high turnout for the figures and some of the, the very high percentages of dissatisfaction.
And what impact do you think the cost of living crisis is having on your members? I imagine that's an extra headache that they could do without.
It is, and for the first time ever, and very disappointingly, my colleagues are resorting to food banks. I've noticed from some of my members across the country who've sent me messages that the local federation branches are having what we call fed fridges, where they're putting food in so members can go in when they want to get food out to feed their family, to feed themselves, to perhaps feed themselves during the shift. We've never had that before. That's just not right. I'm sure that's replicated across other sectors that desperately need a pay rise as well. I can only speak for my members. We've only got 139,000 police officers in this country that we represent as the Police Federation of England and Wales. They need to be looked after with a fair pay that recognises everything they're going through, that they shouldn't having to be resort to food banks or to sleeping in their vehicles. Some of my members can't afford to pay for petrol or diesel to get to work, especially in the more rural communities where you've got a very low public transport infrastructure. They can't get in, so some of them are having to sleep overnight and do back-to-back shifts to try and make ends meet. That's not right. This is the 21st century. It should be getting better, not worse.
And your survey has clearly found some pretty low levels of morale. Obviously, pay, I imagine, is one of the big reasons for that. But what other things do you think are feeding into that low morale among your members at the moment?
Well, it's at a time of a shortage of police officers. You'll notice if you listen to the government comments about, they talk about giving a 20,000 officer uplift. That's because they're trying to replace the 20,000 officers that were taken away from policing over the last decade. We need, in effect, to replace those 20,000. We need about 40 to 50,000 to cover it, because every single year we lose about 6,000 to 7,000 members annually because of retirements, resignations, dismissals, and other associated reasons. So the low morale is they're taking on work which they're trying to do the work sometimes of 2 or 3 police officers. The fatigue is very high. They're getting tired. There's only so many shifts you can do. even if you get overtime before you need rest. Police officers have days off, to have days off from the job, to rest, recuperate, to be physically and mentally fit. That they're suffering from mental health conditions like we've never seen before. It used to be years ago, it was mainly physical assaults, but now with the increased prevalence of PTSD, more of our members are going off sick, short-term and long-term. Those people that are left behind are picking up the shortfall, and it's admirable to do that, but it's only so long you can carry before, if you're equated to a bucket of water and it's full, when you start having no more buckets to fill up, it keeps on pouring out. Members can't cope. That's what's feeding into the low morale, the high fatigue. If you look at the wider criminal justice system and the failings there, the amount of time it takes my, in particular, detective colleagues to prepare a case file ready for court, the new disclosure rules we have take far too long for a simple file. That could be time better spent dealing with victims of crime, talking to them, as opposed to an archaic administrative function, which isn't needed. If we can have a better working relationship with the CPS in law to send them the information we need without redacting it, we can save hundreds of thousands of hours every single year, so police officers can be back dealing with the public, detecting, investigating and prosecuting crime, and hopefully get some of that confidence back in policing, which is so richly needed.
Okay, and I suppose just finally then, how would you sum up your message to the government? What would you like to see them do to make things better for your members?
Initially, I'd like them to listen to what we're saying. I'd like them to take note of our own pay and morale survey. This isn't just us saying it, as we've mentioned, this is 36,000 of my members who have taken the time to fill it out, be honest and forthright about what they're feeling, what they're thinking. You can't ignore these figures. Behind every one of these figures is an officer and their families. They're feeling it. When they talk about being stressed, having low morale, that's human feelings there, which need to be looked at. The government are in fortunate positions. As a senior cabinet member, you have the police protection team. They've got the best protection in the country. The average person walking the street doesn't have that. I want every police officer to be paid properly for the job they do, but for the ministers that are involved, the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, the Home Secretary, the Police Minister, every single MP that's got the ability to start saying, we need to recognise the police service as being a priority, give them fair pay, recognise the restrictions that they have in their private lives, and you can make things a lot better. Because once you take away the goodwill, the low morale that we've got, the high fatigue, people start to leave. They're leaving in their droves anyway. It can be stopped. Focus on retaining the experienced police officer we have, give them the good pay, but please, government, start listening, work with us, give us a fair pay settlement that recognises everything we've talked about, and I think going forward, we can restore policing.